Hello, Kris.
Hello.
Thank you for having me here today. We're sitting in your wonderful piano room surrounded by your amazing bookshelves full of piano books and all sorts of musical books. And
thank you for coming. You're very welcome.
Thank you. It's great. So you're coming to play on the piano boat in not very many weeks, in June, which is really exciting. And, you know, one thing that's been really interesting for me with running these events is having lots of different performers come. So I'm really interested to know, kind of from your perspective, what is it that being a musician is in your life? What does that actually mean to you?
Well, you know, I guess I have quite a wide idea of what it is to be a musician, because I've been very fortunate in my career. I've worked as a pianist, and for that I do a lot of teaching and working with young people, with people who are on the cusp of a good career in music, and you know, people who are just starting out, and people from all sorts of different backgrounds, and seeing what music does to different people in different circumstances, and how it can help people, but how it can really mean something to them and get them places. And also I'm a writer, an academic, and I've studied music quite widely from that point of view. I do a lot of work in ear training, so I'm really interested in kind of the wholeness of the musical sound, and how we, not just how we give music out when we sit at an instrument, but you know, for me, the musician is the kind of the person within. It's how you respond to music, how it makes you feel, and that response, if you can communicate that response, then that makes you a musician on the outside. But really, it's much fuller than that. It's how the music really kind of affects you personally, how it makes you feel human.
Yeah, it's interesting, because I think when people think of what it is to be a musician, you think of performing, but that's like the tip of the iceberg. That's such a tiny part of what actually goes on in the life of a musician.
It's such a tiny part, and you know, I think you're right that people often think about that as musicians. And when I work with groups of musicians in classes, and we work across different disciplines, and I always find it remarkable that, you know, a lot of people who don't maybe know so much about music look at people and say, well, are they a musician? Do they play an instrument? If they don't play an instrument, well, are they really a musician? Whereas actually, for me, a lot of my greatest musicians are singers. And I kind of, the rest of us who play musical instruments often hold singers up as being the highest form of music making, because that's what we're always trying to do with our instrument, is to make it sing. So there's always that interesting thing of, you know, where does the music actually happen? Is it really in here? It's how you understand it and how you project it. So it's really a very large thing to be a musician.
Yeah, gosh. And when you're thinking about singers, I suppose that's kind of seems to be almost the freest form of making music, because it comes literally from you.
It comes. I mean, singers always talk about themselves being an instrument, but you know, it is the body that resounds. You know, and
it's fascinating. So talking about performing, when you perform, when you have a concert to put together, do you approach it, you know, do you have a project in mind in terms of having a program that you would like to perform, or does that evolve from an engagement?
I think often it evolves, that one piece of repertoire, you can pick up a piece of repertoire, and then as you're learning that, it takes you to other places and you get interested in related works. I often find this retrospectively as well, that I will look back at the repertoire that I have and see, oh, there's certain themes that have evolved here. And I didn't recognise that at the time, but sometimes there can be certain strands of your interests, and you look forward and say, oh, actually, well, if I'm putting a programme together, that works quite nicely with that, and maybe there's something else I've had in mind that I'd like to bring to complete that programme. But often a lot of the pieces are already there. Some cases, of course, you can look further and think, well, you know, I want something which is inspired in a particular way, and hope to broaden your repertoire by looking for pieces in a particular way. But often I find often they're already there,
Right.
actually, in your fingers.
Yeah, that's interesting. And you know, with the program that you're going to perform in June, I know it's sort of part of a wider project, which we will talk more about another time.
Which is very exciting.
Yes, I'm really looking forward to that. But this particular program is largely inspired by the outdoors and by nature and birdsong, and that's, you know, ideal for a canal boat. I think, you know, you see all of that out the windows, which is, I think it's brilliant. So I'm interested to know, with the pieces that you've chosen, because some of them are birdsong themed, how much of that is directly representative of the sounds that you can hear outside? You know, if we stopped and opened all the windows in the boat, how much of that would you sort of get on the piano, and how much is more impressionistic? How do composers do that?
That's a really interesting question, because of course there's the whole range of different possibilities there, and actually you will hear the whole range of possibilities there within the program. Those, you know, from the literal imitation of birdsong, and including, you know, a piece I've composed myself in which there is actually a recording of a robin being played, and I play, because robins often duet with each other, I thought it would be an interesting thing to do, to play a robin singing, so you will hear literally the sounds of a robin.
Amazing.
And me duetting with it. And yeah, it's a really nice feeling, actually. You feel, because as I'm playing and I'm listening, and there's a certain, that it's a piece of music which is, you know, is composed. I know exactly what's going to happen. The notes are all there. I wrote it largely through improvisation, but there is a final copy of it that I'm playing. I'm not improvising as I'm playing it, but I'm always listening and responding as I'm playing with the bird, because it has to go in time. And of course, the robin doesn't sing in time in the way that we understand when we play music. So you're always offering that music as a response. So there's that kind of literal representation, and there's the kind of representation which I do as well, of taking the sounds and trying to notate them.
Right.
And imitating as directly as possible. But there's other ways of doing that as well. You know, one of the things that I've done in my work that you'll hear is really taking the sound of birds and wondering, you know, what it would sound like, for example, if we thought of birdsong as music. So does birdsong have harmonies that you can play to it, you know? And often when we make harmonies for a piece on the piano, we'll take certain notes from the melody and construct chords around them. And I thought, well, that might be an interesting thing to do. So you're almost playing a song accompaniment to the bird singing, you know.
I wonder what the bird thinks of that.
I wonder what the bird thinks. Well, it's interesting, because I know I've heard it said of Olivier Messiaen, who of course wrote a lot of bird-inspired music, and people always said, you know, the amazing thing about Messiaen's birds is that they sound incredibly like his music, and it's almost like, you know, you can imagine Messiaen sitting there playing the piano, and the bird's outside copying and singing his music back. Then he goes outside and listens to it, writes it all down, and plays it again on the piano. So there's this kind of dialogue, which you know, birds certainly, you know, do imitate what they hear. Some birds do to some extent, but you know, you can convert that into a musical language where, you know, it can be recognisable as the composer's musical language, or it can be, you know, recognised as the bird. And of course, you get some composers who perhaps convert the birdsong more generally into, you know, bird-like music or trills, and you know, there's one piece I'm playing which imitates a lark, and we get these great big scales going up and down the piano, and lots in the high registers. The kind of the skylarks, and I've been out in the fields here listening to the skylarks. They sort of circle around your head, and you hear these sort of chains of notes coming down, almost like the big scales on the piano. So that can be quite a general thing, where they're actually using parts of the musical language which is there already, and seeing which of those sort of give the representation of the birdsong. And that's often what we hear is not literal birdsong, but bird-like music, and we can kind of hear those imitations happening in the music. So there's a great range there, from the imitations and the more general imitations and the impressions, as you say, of birdsong, to the actual literal representations in music. and the recording
Yeah,
itself.
yes,
So it takes you right through the journey.
That's brilliant.
Yeah.
It's really interesting when you're talking about the skylarks. I mean, there was almost a sort of a visual to that, to how you just described it, of this sort of cascade of notes coming down. That's not really a question, but I just think that's really interesting that you described it in that way.
Yeah.
It's almost like you can see the notes
You
coming
can see
down.
the notes in it, yeah, and you know, it's always funny when, you know, working as a musician, and the kind of tradition of music that I work in, it's, you know, Western classical music where everything is notated, and as soon as you notate an idea, there's a visual representation on the page.
Yes.
You know, so something that you hear in
of
real
course.
time just happening up there actually becomes, you know, it's like Debussy depicting the falling rain by writing, you know, these arpeggios that come down that way, and you see the horizontal rain. And I think I do hear Birdsong often in that way. You hear that it's got a shape to it and a line, whereas actually, you know, it's a collection of notes, but actually you see this image appearing on the...
Almost like artwork on the music.
Absolutely, it's like artwork.
Really
yes,
interesting.
Yeah.
Gosh.
Yeah, it's one thing that I found as well as I've been looking through repertoire, you know, is there any other bird-inspired music that I haven't come across before? And often you can pick out Birdsong by looking on the page and think, well, I wonder if that's inspired, because it looks like Birdsong. Cool. I don't know why, but it looks like Bird. Try it out and see.
Yeah.
Sometimes it is, and sometimes it's not. Yeah.
That's so interesting. Yeah, I mean, I suppose it's almost like looking at a recording. I mean, you see the peaks in a recording. It's sound is so interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, it's got that shape to it. It's got a line,
a visual element to it as well. Gosh, never thought of that before. Actually. Anyway, so obviously you've got, you know, the boat as your venue for this particular program. So you've been on the boat a few times now, and what was your first impression of it as a concert space? Because obviously it's not your standard concert hall.
No.
What struck you about it when you first came?
It's not your standard concert hall.
This is true.
My impression when I first, well, I certainly, I mean, of course I'd seen it in videos before, and I thought, gosh, I was quite intrigued. I wonder how that's going to work, and how does it really feel to have a concert of that size? And then seeing it in action, and not just seeing it in action actually, but feeling it, you know, because you get in there and, you know, there's these sort of warm, dark wooden walls around you, and it feels like a very warm space.
A bit like your piano room.
Yes, in some ways, a bit like my piano room, but more. But it has windows.
It does have.
There are windows behind the camera, but it's, you know, it's more. It has a sense of warmth to it within that space, and you can kind of feel, I think, as the music is played, you can kind of feel it sort of warmly bouncing off the wall. So, you know, you talk about it being an intimate concert space, but I think you really feel that the music is kind of around you, and it's and it always intrigues me as well. And it's only really something I've thought about since hearing music on the boat, is how we hear music differently depending on who we're sharing it with. And on the boat, you have that performance, and you're only sharing it with a select number of people, and it feels different. Yeah, it does. And in playing music in those sorts of environments, it always feels like it's so much more responsive, because you're having it's almost like me playing with my robin, you know, that I'm having a conversation, but I'm really thinking about actually what's this space. And you know, one of my things I do quite a lot when I'm doing ear training work is to get musicians who already, you know, have spent their whole, you know, in some cases they've started a career listening, and their ears work very well and they can hear very musically, but actually getting them to appreciate the whole sound of what they're listening to, and getting them to understand the resonance, and how within that sound, you know, when we write a note on the page, we write you know, I won't say a pinprick, but it's a small dot. But actually within that there's a great big space, and to listen to that big space. And you know, within the piano boat, that note sounds completely different to how it sounds anywhere else. And the experience of only having a few people to share that with also affects the way that the audience hears the music and feels about the music. Actually, that it's quite intimate is a good word, but it's quite special, really. I think it feels like, it's very personal. It's very personal.
I always find it very interesting because, as you say, we've got lots of windows all the way round, and it is an intimate space. And the two are almost contradictory. But because the canal boats sit quite low in the water, and you're actually, your feet are below the water level, you see people's legs going past on the towpath.
Yeah.
But it always amazes me the number of people that walk past and just have no idea what's going on inside.
Yeah.
I find that so funny because, there's this whole kind of thing going on in this room, and it's almost like, even though all the curtains are open and we've got windows all the way around, it feels like a secret, even so, because people don't know that it's going on. It's so funny.
It feels like a secret. That's a really nice way of putting it. But it feels like taking time out from the world. It feels like you step on there and you exist in this space, and there's something happening there which is just shared between this group of people. And you get off the boat and you're back in the real world, and it's kind of changed you in a way. It's very, very special. It's something I hadn't seen coming. I think the first time I went, I hadn't seen that quite coming. But absolutely,
I always say to people at the start of a cruise that hopefully by the end of the cruise you will have forgotten what the real world feels like. That's the goal.
Yeah.
And I think, to an extent we do. I think we get there by the end of the cruise. Because you are so immersed in it. And the music does feel like it sort of wraps you up in a hug.
It wraps you up in a hug. And I think the room wraps you up in a hug. But you still feel that connection with, this beautiful, just, looking out and seeing the water outside and feeling yourself, you're feeling yourself moving as part of that watery landscape. It's a very special thing to be part of.
So knowing all of that and having been on the boat and witnessed an event, how does that affect how you plan and prepare for your own performance?
I think there's a lot of music I'm going to be playing which is, I think, actually feels quite warm. And one of the things that I'm really looking forward to playing is a piece which is relatively unknown, an unfinished sonata by Dame Ethel Smythe, who composed this piece of music as a student, and it was never published during her lifetime. But it has a very pastoral feel to it. I think it's very much inspired by Beethoven's pastoral music, Beethoven's pastoral sonata. It's in the key of D major, and it's got these open fifth kind of like drones, and this very sort of pastoral melody. It's very much warm outdoors music, and it's very much, I think, suited to the other nature inspired music that we've been talking about. And that for me feels like a really it's a piece which when I thought, yes, what shall I play, that stood out to me in my repertoire, because I thought it would really suit that sort of there's an intimacy to it, but there's a rawness there, and I think being quite close to the piano is really nice to experience. So I think there's that sort of, the atmosphere of warmth, I hope, is going to be reflected in the programme quite nicely. And there's a gentleness to a lot of the music, but also there has to be variety there. So I think I'm going to be closing with a piece of music by Franz Liszt, who composed this piece of the Bells of Geneva. It's his final piece in his first year of pilgrimage, in which he hears, I imagine, the sounds of the bells, drifting possibly across the water. And it starts off, you just hear these bells and just the sounds of bells, just these little broken chords. And then, to my mind, he seems to enter this dream world from it, and it's almost like these melodies just unfold, almost like what happens when you start to daydream about those melodies, or maybe you fall asleep listening to them, and then it just breaks out into this hugely euphoric sense of this celebration of what it is to be in this place, and the celebration, to my mind, of actually being outdoors and breathing the air and hearing those sounds, and just the wholeness of that experience coming together. I think it's a wonderful piece of music.
Amazing. I can't wait. I'm so looking forward to it. So you're coming on the 7th of June, which is very exciting, and it's not very long at all now. But thank you so much for talking to me about all of this. It's really, really interesting. And thank you for having me.
Thank you. It's a real pleasure to have you here. And
Can't wait.
I really look forward to returning the favour and coming to visit you and play on the boat. Thank you.